right? Just click, got it, right. As you've already heard, I'm Daana Kanhai, and I'm based here in Trinidad and Tobago. And what I'm going to do this afternoon is I'm just going to share with you a little snapshot regarding the work that I am doing as it relates to the issue of plastic pollution here in the Caribbean. Okay, so in 2019, I was appointed to this Scientific Advisory Committee on Marine Litter and Microplastics. All right, it was a UNEP appointed committee. Our first meeting was in Nairobi, Kenya in February 2020. So we were there just before the borders closed. And I remember when I went to that meeting, one of the things that I was asked was, what's the state of knowledge as it relates to this issue of plastic pollution in the Caribbean? And at that time, while maybe I could have spoken about Trinidad and Tobago and some more neighboring countries, I couldn't exactly speak about the entire Caribbean. And so I just want to say to people that are here, sometimes being at a place where you don't know is a good starting point for everything that comes after that. When I came back to Trinidad, what I then did is that I spoke to my supervisor, Professor Judith Rubin, and I indicated to her, look, this is a good opportunity for us to invest some time and efforts into this area of research. It had also come at a time when the UN had just declared a decade of ocean science and sustainable development. So what we decided to do is that we decided to look at all the peer-reviewed published literature between 1980 to 2020 to figure out what was known about this issue, right? And if we understood what we knew, we would then have a good indication of what we didn't know. And we would also have a good indication of what should we be doing in the future as it relates to research in this area, okay? So if you take a look at this map on your screen, what you're going to be seeing is that for each country, you're going to be seeing some boxes, right? One set of boxes are going to tell you whether that country has any peer-reviewed published data as it relates to marine debris. And the second box is going to tell you whether that country has any data as it relates to microplastics. Now, what we know for our region is that we have more studies on marine debris, than we have on microplastics. We also, so when you look at this image on the screen, you're going to be seeing the predominant colors being this burgundy red color. That tells us that we have a lot of data for marine debris on beaches. But from the time you move off of beaches and you go into your mangrove ecosystems, your seagrasses, your coral reefs, even into the deep sea, we now start needing more resources. So we need people that can dive, snorkel, we need access to vessels, we need access. So from the time you head into the deep sea, we're now talking about a different type of vessel that has the capability to deploy a remotely operated vehicle, right? So we're seeing that for our region, we have some barriers as it relates to research within this area. But you also notice that we have less studies on microplastics. And that is because, again, you see, and so the majority of studies you see in its microplastics in beach sediments. The reason we have this disparity as it relates to marine debris and microplastic studies is because with microplastics, you need resources again. You need more lab time to process your samples. You also need access to instruments that will be able to give you identification of polymers, right? Unfortunately, many of the Caribbean countries don't yet have those pieces of equipment. And so that is explaining why we have this disparity in studies between marine debris and microplastics. But another thing that this image can show us is that almost every single Caribbean country, right, within the CLME region has experienced either marine debris in various environmental compartments or microplastics in various environmental compartments. Now, the image on the screen talks about peer-reviewed published studies, but I think it's important to also keep in mind that for the Caribbean region, one of the sort of initiatives that has worked for us as it relates to data collection are citizen science-led initiatives. So many of you would already be familiar with the international coastal cleanup events. So these are events that are coordinated by Ocean Conservancy, and we have the different hubs in the different countries. But what you're seeing on the screen is a table that shows you whether a country has data about marine debris for a particular year. So the box would be shaded in gray. So for many of the countries, what you are seeing is that you're seeing that we have multi-year data from these countries, right? And if there's an asterisk in the box, that tells you that the country not only has data for beaches, but it also has data about submerged marine debris. Okay, so just highlighting the importance of citizen science-led initiatives and how they have worked here in the Caribbean. It also does highlight that when we think about this issue of plastic debris, plastic pollution, we are dealing with a persistent issue, one that has spanned many, many years, okay? Our study also revealed that when we think of the Caribbean region, the majority of the debris that's reaching the coastal and the marine environment, it's coming from land-based sources. And the plastic debris is being transported to the coastal environment by rivers. It's important to recognize that when we think about the Caribbean region, we also have the operation of oceanic currents. And this is transporting plastic debris into our region. It's causing plastic debris to circulate within our region and also to leave the region. So when we think about this issue of plastic pollution, we are talking about a transboundary problem, right? One that needs attention not only from the individual countries, but from the entire region, okay? Another aspect that we focused on in our research was trying to understand whether we have data from the Caribbean region that tells us whether plastics are posing a threat to biodiversity. And at all levels, we do have credible data that tells us that plastic debris, you can have biological effects, you can have physical effects, ecological effects, and chemical effects. So you can imagine that once an organism ingests plastics, what that plastic particle or particles will do is that it'll start posing a threat to the health of the organism. You then have other instances where organisms can get entangled in larger plastic items like nets, lost nets and stuff like that. And also, it's not only the fauna that's affected, it's also the flora. Within our region, we have mangrove swamps. And what we've noticed in some areas is that you have plastics that are smothering. So the image you're seeing on the screen shows you the pneumatophores of the black mangrove being smothered, right? Some plastics are less dense than seawater. And so what you can have happening is that you can have organisms hitching a ride on plastics. And so they're moving from point A to point B because those plastics are now being transported by the oceanic currents. So now we have another issue where we are thinking about the introduction of alien invasive species, right? Plastics, when they accumulate in mangrove swamps, what they do is that they block certain important areas. So the red mangrove that you're seeing on the screen, they have propagules. Now these propagules, the young mangrove plants, those propagules eventually have to detach from the parent plant. And when they get into the water, they're supposed to be able to circulate and find a nice spot, you know, to be able to settle down and start growing roots. But if you have plastic debris within those areas, what you're now doing is that you're disrupting this ecological process, right? And then finally, when you think about plastics, once there are pollutants that are present in the environment, these pollutants can absorb onto your plastics. And then, of course, once organisms ingest them, they're not only ingesting the plastics, but they're also ingesting the pollutants that are associated with the plastics. So the point of this whole graphic is to just emphasize the point that for the Caribbean region, we already have data that tells us that plastics are posing a threat to the biodiversity within our region. Okay. So generally, we're dealing with a very complex problem. It has multiple causes. We know it's accumulating, plastics are accumulating in various environmental compartments, and we know that there are some known effects. And so what I have done following this study is I have started looking at filling some of those gaps that I mentioned to you about. So trying to delve a little bit deeper into the causes of the problem so that the data we collect can inform the design of interventions that will be effective for our region. So just to, as I circle back then, it's just to say that on that committee, Scientific Advisory Committee on Marine Litter and Microplastics, what we were able to do is to guide the generation of this UNEP report that was released ahead of the UNEA meeting, the landmark UNEA meeting in 2022. I think one of our speakers will be talking about the Plastics Treaty a little bit later on. And just to say that our research, we were able to get it published. And so this is readily available to anyone that wants to access it. And it was in environmental pollution. But the two sort of studies that I will very briefly tell you about, one is a study that we started in 2021, 2022. And this one focuses on the human dimension of plastic pollution in Trinidad and Tobago. Within this study, we wanted to try to understand what is driving people's behavior, what is driving behavioral intentions to reduce plastics, and also what is driving people to support policies related to plastics. We sometimes think that knowledge is the main thing that is driving behavior. But from the field of environmental psychology, we know that there are many other drivers of behavior. And if we can understand those, then we can better craft interventions that are effective. So this work is currently under review right now. So I'm not sharing the results of it, but just a brief snapshot. And then the second project that I'm leading right now is one that focuses on the issue of abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm very curious to hear what one of the other speakers is going to speak about, because I think he's also going to touch on this issue in another Caribbean country. So we generally, globally, we know quite a lot about land-based sources of pollution. But one of the gaps internationally, regionally, and even locally is this area that focuses on marine sources of pollution and plastic pollution we're talking about here. So we know that we have artisanal vessels, right? And they're using different gear types. Some of them are using gill nets, like the one you see on your screen. Some of them are using traps. Some of them are using hooks and lines. So within this project, we wanted to better understand how much plastic waste is coming out from this particular activity. How much of it is entering into the marine environment? What's causing it? Are fishers doing anything to actively avoid or mitigate this issue? We also wanted to find out, do the fishers know where we might have known hotspots of accumulation? And this is really important, especially if you want to take action to remove that gear. And also we are doing a gap analysis to try to find out, are there gaps within our legislation, within our policies? How might we better manage this issue of ALDFG in Trinidad and Tobago, right? So this work, of course, it's underpinned by the FAO surveys. And I think several other Caribbean countries are in the process of utilizing these surveys. The good thing about the surveys is that there would be comparability with the data that's collected because it's using the same instrument. So for this study, we completed the surveys last year. We're now in the data analysis phase, but we have been able to interview over 300 fishers on both islands in Trinidad and Tobago. So as I said, that's a little snapshot of some of the work that I have been doing as it relates to this issue of plastic pollution in the Caribbean. I just emphasize that when we think about plastics, we're dealing with a persistent issue, we're dealing with a transboundary issue, and we're dealing with one that demands attention not only from individual countries, but regional and international attention. So I will leave it there, and happy to take questions during the question and answer segment. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kanhai. Dr. Kanhai is one of my favorite lecturers, actually. She's actually my supervisor currently. Well, I finished my thesis, but she was my supervisor, and we actually did speak about other factors besides knowledge driving behavioral change. So I think that's a really good point that she pointed out there, and I just wanted to highlight that. So we will keep questions at the end in the interest of time. So for our next speaker, we have Saeed Hamid. He's a Guyanese attorney at law specializing in maritime, environmental, and human rights law. With a distinguished academic background, including a Master of Laws from the University of Aberdeen, he has worked in both private practice and public service. Notably, Hamid served at the Environmental Protection Agency of Guyana, where he engaged in national and international environmental dialogues. Following his tenure, he became a legal fellow at the NYU School of Law, collaborating with the Antigua and Barbuda mission to the UN and later the permanent mission of Samoa during its chairmanship of the Alliance of Small Island States. Currently, he serves as a full-time ocean advisor at the Samoa mission, representing AOSIS interests. So with that, Saeed, you have the floor.
Thank you for the introduction, Sweelan. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Saeed Hamid. As I was introduced before, Ocean Advisor with the Alliance of Small Island States. I just want to confirm that you can see my screen.
Yes, we're seeing your screen.
Thank you. So the Alliance of Small Island States is an intergovernmental organization of 39 small island developing states and low-lying developing countries. Our membership spans the African Indian Ocean and South China Sea, the Pacific region, and of course, the Caribbean region. We coordinate on matters related to sustainable development, climate change, and oceans. It is through our oceans division that we coordinate on the plastic pollution negotiations that are currently ongoing. As Sweelan mentioned, AOSIS is currently chaired by the government of Samoa. And I am an ocean advisor there, where we coordinate with our membership on ensuring that SID's priorities are reflected in the future plastic pollution instrument. I think Dr. Kanhai did a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to the impacts and recognizing some of the issues of plastic pollution in small island developing states. So I will briefly touch on some of these key issues that we believe contribute to why SIDs are disproportionately affected by this issue. We know that in terms of livelihoods, fisheries are a main source of food and economic resource for small and developing states, including in the Caribbean region, and impacts on fisheries as a result of plastic pollution results in impacts on livelihoods. There's also the health dimension, whereas impacts of plastics in the food web and in traditional seafood-based diets in Caribbean region, for example, can result in hormonal and physiological changes to the body. We note as well that inland rivers, trenches, and riverways are polluted by plastic pollution, which serve as breeding grounds for diseases and vectors. There's also cultural and aesthetic value. We've noted even in the Pacific region, there are cultural customs and practices that happen in riverways and marine environments that are impeded as a result of existing plastic pollution. There's also the dimension of tourism. Tourism is a huge economic driver in the Caribbean region, and plastic pollution affects prospects of tourism and revenue generation. Finally, there's the issue of biodiversity when it comes to flora and fauna, as Dr. Kanhai had mentioned in her presentation. So after a few multilateral attempts to address the plastic pollution issue, at the United Nations Environmental Assembly in 2022, the international community adopted Resolution 514, rather appropriately titled End Plastic Pollution. Resolution 514 developed an intergovernmental negotiating committee tasked with developing an international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, including in the marine environment. This work is supposed to be completed by the end of this year. We have had 5 negotiating sessions so far, with a 4th one coming up in April in Canada, and a 5th one later this year in November. So far, the negotiations have concluded with a 70-page document that's supposed to be a draft of the instrument. So you can see that there are a lot of issues to unpack when it comes to solutions to address plastic pollution. Resolution 514 outlines some of the key provisions that must be contained in this instrument. Some of these include that we must take a life cycle approach, which means we must look at this issue at the upstream, midstream, and downstream of plastics. What that means is we must look at the design of plastics, the production of plastics, and our waste management and recycling of plastics. This is also important if we are to promote a circular economy in terms of closing the loop on plastics. We're supposed to promote sustainable production and consumption of plastics, prevent, reduce, and eliminate plastic pollution, which for the SIDS, a priority is remediation of existing plastic pollution. We must also include microplastics, both on land and in the marine environment. Dr. Kanhai had also touched on this issue. We're supposed to discuss as well the possibility of national action plans as an implementation tool. The instrument could also include voluntary and binding approaches and must also initiate a multi-stakeholder action agenda. Now, this is particularly important given that a lot of initiatives to address plastic pollution come from CSOs, civil society organizations, NGOs, communities, indigenous communities. And what the multi-stakeholder action agenda would seek to do is involve non-state actors such as those stakeholders in the design and implementation of appropriate solutions. Finally, it must also promote cooperation and complementarity within the existing international legal framework. I will touch on 3 priorities for the small island developing states in the negotiations right now. The first of which is problematic and avoidable plastic products and chemicals of concern. The term problematic and avoidable plastic products is something that is being highly negotiated right now because we have not settled on how we should identify the plastic products that are of concern to the international community. So we've seen terms like problematic, unnecessary, avoidable, hazardous, harmful, multiple tiers of terms that are being used to identify plastic products. However, for the small island developing states, we note that single-use plastics, including plastic packaging, is a huge component of plastic pollution. Plastic packaging, we've seen the impacts and photographic evidence of plastic packaging choking turtles in the stomachs of marine mammals and birds as well. We believe that the strength of the obligations should depend on the level of risk that the product or chemical poses to the environment or human health. That basically means that we should eliminate those that are most harmful, and those that we are working on right now that might be more difficult to transition, we would have phase-out periods that would allow us to then move out towards regulating. We believe that regulation needs to be based on strong scientific evidence of the impacts and take into account the availability of safe, accessible, efficient, economically feasible, and environmentally friendly alternatives. What this means is that as for SIDS, we are net importers of plastic products. We're not major producers of plastic products. And this could mean this could present a lot of challenges and issues for us to transition to reductions in plastic when it comes to regulating the plastic products. So for us, it's very important for us to understand the availability of alternatives that might be readily available for the types of plastic products that we seek to regulate under the future instrument. One of the key things that we have been hearing more research and science on is that the generation of alternatives and substitutes could potentially impose more risks to the environment than currently exist. So this is something that requires a lot of more data and research that we think will be extremely important in the context of small island developing states. As it relates to waste management, we know this is an issue all across the Caribbean. I'm from Guyana myself, and waste management is a huge challenge for us there. For SIDS, we believe that these issues could be unpacked if we have sufficient means of implementation. For us, we understand that our circumstances, as it relates to our geographical conditions, make it difficult to have effective and sound waste management and recycling. We currently are plagued by improperly designed or poorly situated landfills. Landfills are sometimes located next to waterways, which then lead into the marine environment. As we've heard before in the previous presentation, a lot of the marine plastic pollution actually originated from land-based sources. There's a lack of financial and technical capacity and resources to have effective waste management. Given our heavy reliance on tourism, tourism actually generates a lot more plastic waste in the small islands that we're unable to handle. There's also a lack of regulations and effective enforcement frameworks to address plastic pollution, including littering. There's limited data and monitoring systems in place, and there's also the issue of transboundary plastic waste. Another key issue for us is abandoned, lost, or otherwise discarded fishing gear, as we heard in the previous presentation. Currently, the draft that is being negotiated tucks away this issue of abandoned, lost, or otherwise discarded fishing gear as a waste management issue. One of the things that we're considering is that perhaps what we need to examine is a comprehensive look at fishing gear in terms of their design, how we can ensure circularity, how we can ensure that there is proper deposit schemes, for example, perhaps even extended producer responsibility for fishing gear so that we can allow for their collection and proper disposal. In terms of the AOSIS views on waste management in the negotiations, we're hoping to enable the acceleration of collection, sorting, recycling, and sound disposal through strong, ambitious binding obligations with effective means of implementation. This would mean financing, technology development and transfer, and of course, capacity building for waste management offices in the Caribbean region. Any regulation of waste management practices that potentially lead to emissions or releases must be based on sound scientific evidence and facilitative of a just transition for the small islands. We also believe that the instrument could include standards for the design of waste management infrastructure and facilities that would ensure the safe and environmentally sound management. So we would, for example, when it comes to landfills, having sound science inform the design of linings and recognizing how far away from groundwater landfills should be situated. We think there should be standards set for the design of these facilities. It is also important for the small islands that we incorporate the role of our informal waste sector. I believe there was a study quite recently in Guyana that was looking at waste pickers and how they actually generate plastic waste into new products through reuse and recycling for their livelihood. So I think whatever solutions are implemented must take into account the role of the informal waste sector in the Caribbean region. And of course, it is important to unpack the relationship of waste management with extended producer responsibility and recycling. One of the major challenges for recycling is a lot of Caribbean regions islands right now are not segregating waste. And this poses a challenge for recycling. Beyond that as well, there's the issue of cross-contamination and contamination of plastic waste that is suitable for recycling. There's also the issue of fragmented approaches to recycling in that certain bottles might have certain chemicals that are not compatible with recycling technologies. This is why we need global harmonized standards that will allow us to then have a standard approach to how we approach extended producer responsibility and recycling. Another major issue for us to try to understand is the feasibility of recycling, because small island states don't generate enough plastic waste to lead into recycling facilities to allow for a circular approach. We believe that more research and data needs to be generated on perhaps considering regional hubs for recycling. And I think the Caribbean region could be one region where this is possible through existing CARICOM infrastructure that will allow for regional hubs for the trade of plastic waste and recycling. But this is an ongoing discussion. And the third area that is of importance to small island developing states in the negotiations is the remediation of legacy plastic pollution in the marine environment. Now, this is a tricky issue and is something that only the small island states are really championing right now in the negotiations. But we want to ensure that there is some mechanism that allows for the remediation of the existing legacy plastic pollution in the marine environment. We know that, for example, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch has 1.8 billion pieces of plastics currently, and it's growing. It is 3 times the size of France, and with at least 40 million tons of plastics entering the oceans annually, we only see that transboundary marine plastic pollution will be more of an issue going forward. We've heard before that transboundary plastic pollution carries with them invasive species. They impede the growth of mangroves, which are important to small island developing states for natural sea level rise infrastructure. Abandoned, lost, or otherwise discarded fishing gear also makes up a huge portion of marine plastics, but most of this marine debris ends up on the seabed, which is hard for us to collect data on, as we've heard before. There are also impacts on coral, marine mammals, and livelihoods. So for us, remediation is an issue that we see as very important to the discussions. We believe that we cannot end plastic pollution if we do not eliminate the existing plastic pollution. So we're looking at prevention and elimination in both aspects in terms of our negotiations. I'll just backpedal on this slide on waste management. The QR code that you saw there is a gentle plug from AOSIS. We have a monthly webinar that we focus on some of the issues that SIDS are focused on in negotiations. And quite timely enough, our next webinar is on waste management next week, and the QR code is for anyone interested in attending. So for remediation, we believe that there should be some form of mechanism in the instrument that would allow for this. At the previous negotiating session, there was no binding obligation for remediation in the draft text. In terms of the scope, we believe that it must include areas beyond national jurisdiction, not just beach cleanups and inland waters, but we should also be addressing the plastic pollution that exists beyond that will still end up onshore. There must be references to support for remediation, including the possibility of a remediation fund. This is another issue that we're discussing in terms of allowing for both public and private sources of finance to allow for remediation initiatives from a grassroots level on islands. There must also be innovation for remediation. We also believe that when it comes to design for remediation technology, there are concerns that some of the barges that go out there to collect waste in the marine environment are also trapping biodiversity in the actions that they're doing. This is something that we don't want to create another problem while advocating for a solution. So we need more research and development on appropriate technologies for remediation. In terms of the role of science, we've been advocating for a scientific, technological, and economic panel under the future instrument to assist with remediation activities. And this would help with capacity building, conducting assessments, and detecting hotspots where plastic pollution exists right now in the marine environment that will allow us to remediate. Another concern is that large patches of plastic pollution in the marine environment have now become integrated with ecosystems. So removing them could actually cause more harm than good, according to some scientific studies. So we believe that there is a crucial role for science in how we approach remediation. These are some of the just 3 priorities for the small island developing states right now in the negotiations. And if there are any questions, of course, I will happily entertain them. Thank you.
Thank you, Saeed. I think for a lot of us on the call who may not know the extent to the Global Plastics Treaty, I think this was a really good overview of it. And now we have our Global Plastics Treaty expert, Saeed, that I hope we could come to for, any questions. And definitely, we will be putting out that QR code. So anyone interested, please definitely join. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Michael McCarthy. He is the Managing Director of Clean Harbours Jamaica Ltd, a marine waste management company located in Kingston, Jamaica. With over 12 years of experience as a navigation officer and fleet manager, Michael has gained valuable insights and proactively identified opportunities for sustainable development within the maritime industry. His dedication to the protection of marine ecosystems was rewarded in 2022 when Clean Harbours Jamaica was given parliamentary acknowledgement for its contributions to Jamaica's national development. In addition to his maritime expertise, Michael also manages a multifaceted business specializing in terrestrial and marine construction and renovation. So with that, you have the floor, Michael.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Khadija. Was definitely a pleasure to listen to both Dr. Kanhai and Saeed. I really learned a lot from those 2 presentations. So without further ado, thank you everyone for having me. So the project that I'm speaking on is the Kingston Harbour Cleanup Project, of which Clean Harbours Jamaica Ltd is a core partner. My other 2 partners on the project are the Ocean Cleanup, which is a Dutch non-profit organization, and the Grace Kennedy Foundation, which is a sub-branch of the Grace Kennedy group of companies here on the island, both being large global brands that have vested interests in marine pollution, both here on the island and otherwise. The project is the first of its kind, and our operation started officially in February 2022 and our aim is to prevent the solid waste from entering our Kingston Harbour. We aim to also raise awareness about the pollution problem that's facing the Kingston Harbour and its environs. Because, you know, it doesn't just span from our harbour, it also spills over into, as Saeed mentioned, varying outlying bodies, whether it be the Keys or spilling across the other islands. I will side with you, Saeed, and say that I know it's a very expensive venture, this marine waste management and waste pollution prevention. However, I think that focusing mainly on what we are doing on our individual islands, and potentially just as how the CARICOM regions have come together to discuss various bilateral talks, I think this is something that we can all get together and do. So I'm really grateful that this forum allows such an opportunity. So I'm going to share the screen so that I can share a presentation that I have here, which gives an overview of what the Kingston Harbour project is. So Kingston Harbour boasts immense ecological and economic social value. We have the 7th natural largest harbour in the world, which is home to over 1,000 marine species, from seagrass to its mangrove forest, and hosts of various wildlife, marine life. It also supports the Port of Kingston, which is known as the transshipment hub of this hemisphere. We have over 60,000 people that live within 1 kilometer of the shoreline of Kingston Harbour, and over 9 fishing villages along our harbour. The Kingston Harbour has been under threat from marine pollution for decades. And it was only recently through one of our local ministers that we started to really tackle and target most of this. Minister Samuda, who is the minister I'm making reference to, was one of the key persons who first started with a single-use plastic ban on the island, which did help significantly in reducing the pollution to various households and also industrial zones. However, it doesn't stop there, as we all know pollution is a personal problem that we all need to tackle from within. A lot of on our island, we have, you know, our waterways, we call them gullies, and this is from where most of our pollution stems that lead to the Kingston Harbour. So whatever happens further upstream in the communities tends to find its way washing down through our rivers and into the drainage systems, and then it finds its way into our harbour. To date, we have prevented at least 1.5 million kilograms of trash from entering our Kingston Harbour. We have placed our barriers, which is a part of the collaborative effort between us and the Ocean Cleanup and Grace Kennedy. We have installed 7 of our barrier technologies that we and the Ocean Cleanup have brought to the island, which these barriers cause and assist in stemming the flow of the debris that comes down. So we put them at the mouth of the gullies, and through these barriers being at the mouth of the gullies, it systematically stops and stems further outpouring of plastics and further pollutants, because it doesn't just stop the plastic, it stops some of the solid waste as well. We also utilize specialized marine vessels to do harvesting. We have 2 of these vessels currently operating, a 3rd on the way, and we are hoping that through our expansions and what we're doing, we can see a further reduction of the pollution to the Kingston Harbour. A lot of lessons have been learned on this project, you know. There's no one solution that fits anything. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution for our Kingston Harbour. It's very dynamic. It taught us that we have to spend a lot of time learning from environment, learning from the local parties in the various communities where we have barriers established in and around the harbour, because they are the ones that see the problem firsthand and know exactly what they're facing. Through the Grace Kennedy Foundation, we have been able to coordinate various beach cleanups, community initiatives, getting volunteers from different walks of life in the communities. Corporate and both private stakeholders have been able to come on board through Grace Kennedy's support. This map here shows what we have done thus far in the Kingston Harbour. It shows the 7 deployments that we've had so far, and it also shows where we're scaling up to in the next coming year and the year after that, because we aim to tackle another leg of the Kingston Harbour called the Huntsville region, which houses one of the largest waterways, I think, in our region, called the Sandy Gully, which spans almost 340 feet long, wide by over 2,000 feet long. And this is just a man-made structure. This is not a natural river or stream. It is a gully that was designed from which all the filtering, some of the smaller gullies filter into it, and it pumps out into the harbor. The Kingston Harbor is a very valuable natural resource. As I said, we also host the Port of Kingston, which is this transshipment hub of the hemisphere. You know, most of the vessels that are transiting from here to go to the Americas or wherever have to pass through Kingston to do their containerizations or otherwise before they head off to Trinidad and the other entities. In addition to that, we also have our Petrojam refinery, which vessels that come through here and again go off into Trinidad to their various refineries frequent this area. So the harbor is very important, and that was one of the main reasons why myself as a navigator and my other two partners decided that this was something that we wanted to be a part of. So with that being said, I would just like to share a video here of, sorry. Uh-oh. Apologies, it doesn't seem that it will allow me to show the video. But this was just a video to highlight how the interceptor tender, which is the name of the vessel that's here, reaps from the barriers. So what the vessel does, it approaches the barriers, the conveyor belt system, which is on the front, goes over the barrier, lowers itself, and it self-feeds the debris on board. We then take the debris from the barriers up to our offloading sites, where the debris is then cleaned, washed, sorted, and dispatched to the relevant agencies. Those that can be recycled, we send them to be recycled or upcycled, and the other debris sent for destruction. This also shows an image, it's an older image of what the offloading site is, but this is the offloading site to show what the debris is on, and we load them into large burlap sacks and then transport them. What's this? So there has been huge stakeholder engagement, as I said, from both private and public sector. Right? We've had various beach cleanups that have occurred in and around for the project. And we've had a lot of the private stakeholders, including the government, who recently, as Khadija had introduced, that they have recently showcased their interest in what we're doing. And that is a huge buy-in for us, because nothing happens in a small line without the support of the government. You need the people, but you also need the government's buy-in. So that was very important for us to have happen. So this showcased the volumes of waste that we've gotten thus far. This number might have changed, as this was up until December 2023. And we did have some rain events over December, so the new data will be uploaded shortly. But this is the information that we have thus far. So we also do school tours where we try and educate the youth on what, you know, plastic pollution means, what it means to recycle your debris or your garbage, and, you know, sort your waste in the right manner, ensure that things are properly disposed of. Because I think the best way to get through the message to people is to teach the young ones so that they can then go back to their homes and teach. So we have created what we would like to call the interactive visitor center, which has murals and signage. It was done by a local graphic artist. The students can come in and, you know, interact and engage and get a feel of exactly what it is that we do here, to understand fully how the process works. And that kind of gives them a better feel. You know, just telling them about it is one thing, but for them to be able to actually interact and see what is going on is really important. So I think that this is a key part of our operations. We also have a very strong team led by our waste manager, who I believe had a recent webinar with you guys at the UN in the past week or two. And with that, you know, it teaches, we do a lot of upskilling of the staff. She ensures that the various waste processes are adhered to and the protocols of the project are the mandates are kept strong. So in these images, you'll see Senator Samuda, who, as I said, was the minister that ensured that the single-use plastic ban, and the former mayor of Kingston, Honorable Minister Desmond McKenzie. But they're both very integral in, ensuring that waste management and the pollution problems are being tasked and tackled. I believe that as the country itself continues to develop further, because we ourselves as a nation, we aren't exactly a seafaring country, so the value of the waterways wasn't something that we were tasked with from day one. We had to learn the value of our waterways, and I think that delay posed a huge impact on how the pollution problem really started. So this showcases the different sustainability partnerships that we've had. I said we've had both private and public or government entities. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that insightful presentation. And it was really nice to see a technical solution on the screen. And since you'd have downloaded the video, I think at the end, if we have time, we could definitely play it. So now I'll introduce Nathan. He is a final year zoology major at the University of Guyana. He's passionate and is passionately dedicated to conservation and sustainable resource management. His bachelor's research project centers on assessing the impacts and identifying abandoned fishing gear along Guyana's eastern coast, with a focus on combating ghost fishing. Nathan aims to contribute valuable insights into this phenomenon, crucial for marine biodiversity conservation in the Caribbean and beyond. And in the interest of time, Nathan, I'll ask you politely if you could keep it to 10 minutes if possible. Thank you.
Right. Thank you for that introduction. I'll try to keep it as minimal as possible. All right. Okay, great. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, seeing your screen.
All right, great. So as mentioned, I'll just be diving a bit into the ghost fishing issues that Guyana is currently facing. So as a University of Guyana final year student, I was actually encouraged and decided to do my research project surrounding ghost fishing, considering how limited research is in Guyana's marine space, more so as it relates to abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing. So just to have a breakdown of what exactly ghost fishing is. So ghost fishing is the unintentional capture of marine organisms by derelict fishing gear. So derelict meaning fishing gear that has become in a somewhat broken down state and is out in. So this happens without human action. And globally, ghost fishing gear is known to originate from net fishing industry, where the fishing nets and other related gear become lost, damaged, or unintentionally discarded directly into the ocean. And there's many research worldwide that shows that 640,000 tons of fishing gear actually becomes ghosted every single year. And these entrap many marine organisms and contributes to mortalities along coastlines and at sea. So during my research, as part of my research, I had to investigate some of the possible causes or reasons why fishing gear becomes ghosted. And here I have snagging, which might possibly be one of the most prevalent ones in the Caribbean. This is where these nets become torn or damaged on abrasive surfaces, and being corals or on rock bed. And there's gear conflicts, nets entangling with each other, adverse weather conditions, overloading of the fishing gear. Probably fishing nets might trap or catch a large quantity of fish. So the fibers become weak over time. And then there's intentional disposal where, fisher folks just discard of these fishing gears directly into. So just to have a breakdown of Guyana's fishing industry, I'd just like for you to understand that Guyana is located on the northeastern coast of South America and is bordered by the Atlantic Ocean to the north. And we have 430 km of Atlantic coastline, and this is where the marine fisheries occurs. So we have three types of fisheries here in Guyana: industrial, semi-industrial, and artisanal fisheries. And we'll be focusing mostly on the artisanal fisheries because of the variety of gears they use and the high prevalence of being unregulated. So this is an example of our landing sites where fishermen go out at sea and come back to our coastline to whether it might be to sell their catch, and in some cases like sort their nets, depending on what gears they're using. So far here you can see this is me actually out in the fields where I was carrying out my data collection. And I have found three types of fishing gears that can be characterized as ghost gears. There's the gill nets, which is probably the most popular that most people know about when they think of ghost fishing. They are floats and ropes. All of these are originate from the fishing industry and were found between mangrove forests and beaches along the eastern coast of Guyana. So the fishing practices is what we actually have to focus on. One of the factors we have to focus on to actually understand the relationship between ghost gear and fisher folk. So we need to know exactly what happens offshore. How fishermen are taking care of their nets. What happens when a net becomes torn or when the fibers become short. And then there's also net husbandry, how well fishermen take care of their fishing nets. All of this can help us to understand what actually causes nets to become twisted. And then there is the point of awareness. If fishermen actually know of the detrimental impacts those gears can have on marine ecosystems. And all of this, in many opinions, can be sorted due to collaborative mitigation methods. The possibility of effectiveness and willingness of fisher folks to actually cooperate with government organizations to help reduce the impact and prevalence of ghost fishing. So in essence, my presentation or my point that I'd like to bring forward to you all is that ghost fishing is a real issue. When many persons think of marine pollution, they first think of, yes, plastic, but they don't immediately think of fishing nets out there in the ocean for many, many years, just doing what is called cyclic trapping and causing mortalities of many marine species. And because of that, there's a need to address this issue. We all know that the marine fisheries is an important sector for the livelihood and economic value for many of our Caribbean nations. So that there's a need to address this issue of food fishing because it has potential to affect from a food security standpoint and an economic. And then there's also the lack of research and data both locally and regionally. My study is actually the first of its kind in Guyana that actually focuses on assessing the impact of those fishing along Guyana. So thank you all for into my presentation. Should be having a question and answer segment where I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nathan, for that very insightful presentation. You guys can't see me. No, you can. Right, as I was saying, for that very insightful presentation on ghost gay, you know, that's something that, like you mentioned before, that's an aspect of plastics that a lot of people don't take into consideration. Because for the most part, that's something that is completely out of sight and out of mind, unless it's on shore in a rope. And half the times that's also buried in the sand. And it's just like a small piece of rope will be sticking out. And then when you pull in, you realize, wow, is this massive thing, you know, that was living there for however long. So I really appreciate your presentation and you providing insight on Guyana's situation with ghost care and your research as well. And in the interest of time, I would move on to Sweelan Renaud. So Sweelan is a marine biologist specializing in ocean conservation and research. With a background in marine biology and an MSc in biodiversity conservation. She consults on climate and ocean-related projects in the Caribbean. Sweelan has also represented Trinidad and Tobago at global conferences and advocates for youth engagement in environmental conservation through organizations like Sustainable Ocean Alliance with our Caribbean hub, as well as with EcoVibes Environmental Creatives. So, Sweelan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Sharing my screen now. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, all good.
Okay, great. Thank you for that introduction, Khadija. I'd actually like to pinpoint something that Michael said. He said waste is a personal problem we all have to tackle from within. I think that's a great point and that he mentioned, and it ties into what Dr. Kanhai said about identifying the factors that drive behavioral change. So I had the pleasure of conducting, managing, coordinating a project in Trinidad for SOA Trinidad, SOA Caribbean, last year, June for Oceans Month. And it's called Into the Synthetic Sea. And if you realize, that's the name of our webinar. So a little cheeky thing that we did there. But yeah, so the name of the project is Into the Synthetic Sea. And for me, Into the Synthetic Sea was born out of the fact that for the Caribbean, and I can speak for Trinidad and Tobago because that's where I'm from, a lot of us still, and maybe you agree, aren't as connected or still very disconnected with our ocean and our marine and our coastal resources. A lot of us don't swim, can't swim, don't venture out there. We have no idea what's going on beyond the shore, as in what's underwater and what our impact is. So we wanted to capture unique footage of the plastic pollution problem on land and definitely underwater. And of course, we'll be raising awareness about the plastic pollution problem in Trinidad, but we also wanted to take it a step further and write a report concluding our findings, I think, just to be a bit more impactful. And at the end of the day, that's data, so we should definitely document it. And it's being finalized currently, so soon it will be shareable so that everyone can see. And from that data, we can use it for outreach. And before I get into the project, I just wanted to highlight new research that says cleanups reduce plastics entering the ocean. There is a large organization in Norway called NORS, and they found that within a year of volunteers removing bottles, bags, and other large pieces of plastics from the shore, the amount of microplastics on land and in the water fell by 99.5%. I just wanted to highlight that because I think sometimes people, as a youth organization, and for the layperson, you're probably wondering exactly what you can do to help this problem and be the change and provide a solution. And a lot of people think that beach cleanups and these initiatives are probably a nuisance because it's like you're enabling people. They know that you're going to clean up the beaches. But this research clearly states that cleaning up plastic pollution already out there still does matter, and there's no science to back it up. Okay, so our cleanup, as I said, took place in Trinidad and Tobago. It took place in this chain of islands called Down the Islands. It is off the northwestern peninsula of Trinidad and Tobago. We go there to party and fet, have a good time, lime. And the only way that Scotland Bay is accessible is by boat. So we already seen the issues there. Observably, there's no infrastructure there for waste disposal. So as soon as you reach there, there's trash all over because when people come, they leave their trash there. They don't take it back with them. I think we also have a large burning culture of rubbish in Trinidad and Tobago. So like people tend to leave garbage in secluded areas. They'd leave a whole fridge. They'd leave a couch, and try to burn these things. And that was clearly visible when we went to Scotland Bay, that they left the garbage there and also tried to burn it. Also, people like to go and cook in these areas and carry the coal pots and these types of stuff. So it's a lot. It's depressing to see, but that is why we decided to choose Scotland Bay, because a lot of people don't have it's expensive as well to get a boat to go over there. Have the resources to be able to do cleanups there all the time. So we decided, since we had the funding to do it, that we'd choose this area to clean up. So our cleanup day was, as I said, last year, June, for World Oceans Month on the 10th of June. And our goal was to conduct an underwater and onshore cleanup of a beach located off the northwestern coast of Trinidad, unofficially known as Down the Islands. So we had our data collection portion, of course. If you're aware of the International Coastal Cleanup Initiative that happens every year around September, we would have participated in that and still participate in this initiative. We think it's a really good initiative because they focus on data collection. We weren't reinventing the wheel. We still had data sheets left over from our last cleanup with ICC. So we used those sheets to collect data for our initiative on Scotland Bay. So these are just some pictures. I think these are probably some of the better ones, but these are some pictures from before. I don't know, this looks like a tent. I'm not sure what this is. You can see a can in the corner here. I don't know if you see my arrow. Plastic bottles, glass bottles everywhere, and the beach was just full ridden of these items. We also advocate for underwater cleanup. We are a marine conservation, all about oceans organization. So we have a lot of divers. And if you have the resources to do this, because it was a couple of divers, renting dive equipment, if you don't have your own, can be expensive, especially if it's by the hour or anything like that. We definitely advocate for underwater cleanup because we do the beach cleanups, and of course it's horrible, but this is what we found underwater. And it's so interesting that our divers actually weren't able to move further than where they dropped off, because that one area was ridden with so much trash that they were able to move around during the duration of the cleanup. And they probably bought out about 5 or more of these bags, very heavy. As you can see, there's a lot of glass bottles in these bags. So when people are on their boat partying, they drop their bottles in the water. And I mean, there's no air down there. So when our divers are picking up these bottles and putting it in these bags, these mesh bags underwater, it's full of water, and glass is already heavy. So these bags were extremely heavy when they were bringing it out of the water. So this is just some of the items that we would have. This in the corner here looks like a fuel oil bottle. I don't know if you think so, but I think that's what that was. So this is after, I think we did a good job, and to anyone on the call, the project team, thank you very much for participating in this cleanup, and we definitely will be doing more of these underwater and onshore cleanups. And for the results, in roughly 3 hours, we collected 14 bags of garbage, and more than 1,700 pieces of trash were picked up, and the total weight amounted to over 400 pounds of garbage. A quick pie chart. Obviously, plastics was more than half the percentage of what we found underwater, followed by glass, styrofoam, aluminum, and fishing gear. And then as well on land, the same order of plastics being more, followed by glass, aluminum, foam, styrofoam, aluminum, fishing gear, and also electronics. So for key takeaways, roughly 53% of garbage found on shore and underwater is recyclable, because that is also an area that we're exploring in our report, what's recyclable and not recyclable. Many marine animals were found living or trapped in pieces of trash. There's actually a gelatinous looking creature on a styrofoam plate, and all of us were perplexed. Like, what exactly is this? So there were a lot of crabs coming out of the bags when we drag them up on shore. So a lot of animals do get trapped, because at the end of the day, they're adaptable and they tend to adapt to these things. But that doesn't make it right that we leave the trash there. And plastics, of course, was the most common type of garbage found on land and offshore. And we had an amazing member, Riyadh. He was able to do some outreach on behalf of SOA Caribbean with that data from the cleanup. He would have spoken to his alma mater primary school and given them an introduction into SOA Caribbean and the initiative that we had. And it had some prize giving as well. So definitely thank Riyadh for taking his time to do this. And that would have been us as a youth organization, our role, the part that we played, and the part I think anyone could play in the plastic pollution problem. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Sweelan. You know, that was also very insightful, diving into the work that was done by SOA Caribbean at Scotland Bay in Trinidad and Tobago. You know, like you said, that beaches down the islands, and getting there in itself is a whole trial and tribulation. It's expensive, but also having the waste disposal infrastructure present is also a challenge. But I know we're on time, and my background just became so very loud. So if anybody have questions and be able to stay on for like 5 minutes to answer questions, feel free to either type it in the chat or unmute yourself, and we could jump straight into that. Or you could type the question in the chat, and you know, we could respond there, etc. But I see we have one question. I saw it before. Yes, and it said, a regional recycling hub is an interesting solution, and this may be a pessimistic view, but at its core, this is exporting waste, and that is usually coupled with exploitation, as we've seen. Can you talk about what fail-safes might be put in place to safeguard the environment, society, economy of the designated country, especially when Caribbean countries are already struggling to manage their own waste? So I think this question is targeted towards Saeed, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm happy to take it, Khadija. No, I think this is part of the considerations that we're having in considering regional recycling hubs. There are a lot of issues to unpack there, and one of the suggestions was to piggyback on the Basel Convention, because given the plastic amendments that happened in, I believe, 2021, plastic waste is also now subject to how you move waste under the Basel Convention. So I know there's a Basel Convention Regional Center in Trinidad that's been doing some amount of work in terms of aligning the requirements as might be necessary under that, to kind of see where the gaps exist right now, and if there's any opportunity for piggybacking on some of the requirements and protocols in place to prevent any damage to the environment. But I will say that with the caveat that I think it all comes back to the safeguards and the means of implementation and the support for SIDS to implement these measures. I think we're already having difficulties complying with Basel. I think if we add another layer to that without fixing some of the institutional issues that we encounter, then we're just going to be perpetuating the same problem, and we will not have the sound, effective solution that we're hoping to have. So that is a concern and something that we are weighing on our side. I think it all comes back to ensuring that there's sufficient capacity, technology development, and financing to ensure that we have the institutional infrastructure in place to implement the safeguards that will be necessary. And that's where the key gap is right now in the negotiations. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Saeed. I don't know if Micah has a follow-up to that, but does anyone have any further questions? If you don't have any further questions, I would like to thank that our speakers. Would you mind if any of our participants reach out so they could ask questions if anything boils up at that point in time after the webinar? But thank you so much, everyone, for coming to the webinar. Thank you to all our speakers for also rescheduling with us, as we were supposed to have this webinar last week Friday. We definitely had a fruitful and insightful conversation from policy to technical to scientific, and then we had youth in civil society and research. So thank you very much to everyone that came out. And with that, we will end this webinar. So thank you all for coming. See you next time.